Lawyers of Reddit, what was the best gotcha moment you ever experienced? Lady got into a minor fender bender with a truck in a casino parking lot. She backed out of a spot into him. My guy said she parked and went inside the casino for a few hours. At her deposition, she testified that she was so hurt she went right home and to a hospital. I asked if she was a frequent visitor of casino and if she had a rewards card. She was happy to tell me she did and she had gold status and showed me the card. I subpoenaed her rewards card's records and it showed she was playing slots for hours after the accident. My client's house burned down from an explosion in the fuel oil tank used to heat the house. It was clearly the oil maintenance company's fault, but his homeowner's insurance, from a very reputable company, still refused to pay out, citing a ridiculous technicality in his policy. Essentially, the policy covered damage caused by the oil heater, but they claimed that it was the storage tank that exploded and wasn't part of what was covered. So they deny his claim, which was about 1.2 million, and then I get involved. During a deposition with the claims adjuster, I ask how she came to the conclusion that the storage tank was not a part, or at least connected to, the heater. She states that she relied on her expert witness who was an engineer. Little did she know I had already checked this person's background. He had zero engineering experience or education. As most of you might know, you don't get attorney's fees in most cases. However, when an insurance company denies your claim in bad faith, now you do. Her little admission cost the company about $500k in fees, on top of the original claim for 1.2 million. And this is why so many people try to screw insurance companies. Because they are right there, trying to screw you too. Plaintiff had an x-ray of an allegedly broken arm. It seemed off to me and the dates didn't make sense. I was in-house at an academic medical center. I looked at the case more closely and discovered the plaintiff was a x-ray tech at another hospital. After that, it was all over. I was trying to get a restraining order for a woman in DV court from her son's father. We are presenting testimony and she details a story where he grabbed her arm and slammed it on the tub, breaking her wrist. On cross, I asked the accused if he ever broke my client's wrist on purpose. His response, "Fuck yeah, I did." She was 9 months pregnant, about to smoke crack and wouldn't stop. I tried to grab her arm to get the pipe and protect my unborn son. Fuck me. She left that detail out in her conversations with me. I had a former client file for bankruptcy and in connection with that case brought an action against his landlord for violating the automatic stay. In order to prove damages, he wanted to show he paid my firm for legal fees in connection with the landlord's pursuit of rent and violation of the stay. So this former client's bankruptcy lawyer serves me a subpoena to show up at the bankruptcy hearing. He didn't ask me any questions prior but just gave me the gist of what the objective was, that is, verify with the court the time I spent and the cost to his client. The bankruptcy attorney called his client, my former client, to the stand first. He asked him questions related to his hiring my firm to do this and that as it related to his landlord. Apparently that's not enough. The bankruptcy attorney wants me to verify these facts as well. I get put on the stand and I'm asked to verify the invoice. I first object to the question as a precaution since it may be a violation of attorney-client privilege to answer the question and to cover me for any claim by the bar or my former client. As predicted, the judge overrules and orders me to answer. I review the invoice, answer, "No, this is not my invoice." His attorney, "I don't understand. This is your firm's logo and information, right?" Me, "Yes." His attorney, "And you provided these legal services, right?" Me, "No." A very confused attorney slowly started to put together, after a couple more follow-up questions, that this idiot client of ours had manufactured my invoice to prove his damages. Needless to say that I could have given his new attorney the heads up, but I wasn't going to help someone who had committed perjury to the court using my name. I had represented him in a completely different matter and this guy was trying to make some extra cash through this bankruptcy hearing. 2 lessons. Tell your attorney everything, and as an attorney, make sure your client feels comfortable to tell you everything. Cross-examining a custom home builder who had a lump sum contract, set price as opposed to cost plus, which means cost of the materials plus X% as builder fee, with the homeowner. Claimed he put 20% more labor, materials and building the home than the contracted provided for, and he was suing for these excess costs. Was asking him about an email with my client negotiating the price of the construction, and he volunteers that he knew he couldn't build it for that price. My head snaps up, supervising partner's head snaps up, and opposing counsel goes pale. Dialogue was something like, me, you quoted X price? Builder, yes me, you knew you couldn't build it for that price? Builder, yes me, you knew the homeowner was relying on that quote? Builder, yes me, you knew homeowner wouldn't have signed contract without that representation? Builder, yes me, and you told homeowner's lender you could do it for X? Builder, yes me, and bank relied on that price and wouldn't have given loan if knew it was wrong? Builder, yes. This is textbook fraudulent inducement and he had no idea. Builder got poured out in the arbitration award and slapped builder with sizable punitive damages on top of it. 5 minutes of testimony sunk his case because he volunteered information without being prompted. Plaintiff alleged he was so injured in an auto accident that he couldn't work, do any regular activities, or pick up his young kids. He then posted on his public FB profile him doing the ice bucket challenge. If you're not familiar, he basically lifted a huge cooler filled with ice water over his head. His attorney had no idea he had posted it. Once heard about a man who got a doctor to do him a report for his compo claim can't bend, can't lit, can't run, etc. Problem was, he had a paternity suit ongoing at the same time. Got the same doctor to write a report for that case, no restrictions on mobility, can pick up the kid, play with him, etc. As you can guess, he and the doctor got caught. Perhaps not my best, but it was recent and pretty good. I represented a guy whose car died in the middle of the freeway at 4 AM. He put his hazard lights and called 911 for help. At the same time, an LAPD cop, heading to work around the same time in a police unmarked car, was driving around 87-92 miles per hour. Deconstructionist. He doesn't see our guy, strikes him and causes a major 6-car collision, including overturning an 18-wheeler truck. Police arrive and take photos. LAPD officer claimed our guy did not have his hazard lights on and he was only driving 60 miles per hour. He was trying to put some of the fault on our guy. At the deposition of the investigating officer, she doesn't remember if our guy's hazard lights were on or not. Attorney bring photos from the scene. One of the photos showed my guy's hazard lights on. We were dismissed shortly thereafter. Not so much a gotcha as it is a defendant giving themselves up. When I worked for insurance defense, I handled a fraud case where a man reported his Rolex as being stolen. He was adamant that he was at a hotel and it was stolen. He has shown no proof of being in a hotel, so it's flagged. We go through the whole process and finally reached depositions. He gets sworn in and eventually let out that he wasn't at a hotel but rather with his mistress and he had left it at her house. His wife noticed he didn't have it on, so he immediately claims it must have been stolen, etc. etc. This man decided to hire an attorney and go through this whole circus just so his wife wouldn't find out about his affair. Needless to say, the claim was denied. Not a lawyer, but when I was in the military I was accused of something I didn't do. And I had to go to court over it. And during court the prosecutor started to detail this investigation and how they had staked my apartment out for months. They entered into evidence a picture of my apartment. And when they put it up I looked shocked at my lawyer. BC, it wasn't a picture of my place. It was my ex-wife's apartment. A place I had never lived, never even spent a single night there. I lived in a house, she lived in an apartment. And when my lawyer was asked if she objected to the picture being entered into evidence, she replied, I don't mind them entering it into evidence as long as they change the listing of it. And when one of the members of the panel, no judge, 3-member board, asked what was wrong with the listing, she looked at him and said that's not his apartment. On top of this, the witness they used against me described going to my house on the night in question and she named the subdivision where she had visited me, except that wasn't where I lived either, also wasn't where the picture they had was either. Case was dismissed and I was told they requested the witness to return to answer questions about perjury. Mayo when you investigate the entirely wrong house. Someone getting fired. Dude, you have no idea. The funny thing was, when they brought me in to question me they had this huge folder full of their evidence and I was just like WTF is going on in there. And because I wasn't cooperating by confessing to something I hadn't done they wouldn't show me what was in it. But they had to turn it over to us before court. And it was legitimately like 5 or 6 months full of entries where they had someone scoping out my ex-wife's house. And each entry said something along the lines of when they got there, how long they were there and no contact made with subject. So they really were at the wrong house every day for 5 or 6 months and never realized it. I have no idea why they never just tailed me home from work or something. My wife had insurance through me for my daughter so when they updated her address in the hospital computer, somehow they also changed mine as well. But this was back when phone books were still pretty useful, and my address was properly listed in the damn phone book. They just never looked. They just sat at the wrong house for 6 months and still went forward with this case that they had no evidence on. Edit. So all of this investigation and drama led to a court case where the entirety of the evidence against me was basically the word of 2 witnesses. One who never testified, and the other who said she came to my house. She was never there, in a subdivision where I never lived. I mean that was one thing I really hated about the military, that they can just do stuff like this to you. BC that trial never would have happened in the civilian world. Had a client accused of leading the cops on a high-speed chase. The cop on the stand estimated he was going 90 miles per hour, but never actually clocked him. Then the cop identified where the chase started with me, and where it ended. It lasted about 2 miles. Then we went through his log of when it started and when it ended. About 3.5 minutes. Once you walk through the math on that, the average speed of this chase was 35 miles per hour. Client got acquitted really quickly after that. So the cop did 90 miles per hour to catch up with client and decided to call it a high-speed pursuit? Cause that's what it's sounding like. A friend of mine got pulled over once. I was in the car with him. When the cop approached us, he said, "Do you know how fast you were going?" I had to go 70 to catch up. My only thought was, how does that matter? It's not like he'd catch up by matching our speed. I'm still confused by that interaction. When that math problem in 6th grade about how fast the car was going depending on its speed and distance traveled actually matters. The first case I ever did, opposing counsel misplaced the copy of my client's driver's license. Rather than admitting his mistake and asking me to resend it, he filed a motion to compel, claiming we never sent it. Well, I was able to provide proof that we'd sent it to him like 8 months ago, so the judge was rather displeased with his antics. The judge was rather displeased with his antics, not a lawyer, but this tends to be my impression with judges who catch people doing shady things. I remember once, during undergrad, being an intern with the probation office and the case ahead of our revocation hearing had a guy pleading guilty. During his rambling and disjointed allocution, the judge frowned. "So why are you pleading guilty exactly?" The guy replied, "My lawyer told me to." The judge was most displeased when he questioned the guy further and found out the guy had no concept of what he was doing or what the potential sentencing could be. Sometimes, it's just incompetence. I was observing a federal case 2 weeks ago. In the opening statement, the lawyer had a PowerPoint presentation that looked like something a high school student made. It was filled with clip-arts, powerful, but irrelevant, pictures that evoke feeling like handcuffs, jails. The judge stopped him, sent the jury away, and asked the lawyer, "You realized you cannot present arguments in an opening statement, right? Do you have any other similar visual in your presentation?" The lawyer said no and the jury was called out again. Presentation continued but there were more pictures so the judge had to stop him again. This time the judge said, "You clearly had no understanding what is allowed in an opening statement so I'm just going to disallow the presentation altogether." There was a few more times the judge had to call the lawyer out in that case but ultimately his side win. It was a very odd case with so much mistake by that lawyer. Represented a DUI client who swore up and down to me he hadn't been drinking or doing any drugs. Newbie officer who had his field training officer with him in the car. Rookie pulls client over for a tag violation, walks back to the car with body camera still on. Training officer says get him out for a DUI and the rookie says but he's not intoxicated, to which the reply was do it anyway. Body cam clicks off. Turns on 7 minutes later and they're doing field sobriety exercises on my client. Client sat in custody for 3 weeks until I finally got the tape from the prosecutor and presented it to the judge. The oh shit looks from the prosecutor and FTO when the judge saw the tape. I'll treasure that one. Judge wrote the police chief a letter saying the FTO was dead to him and he'd deny every search warrant he tried to bring thereafter for being a liar. Client is hopefully still on track with his civil attorney in a lawsuit. I was suing a landlord who failed to make serious repairs in order to force the tenant out. The hard part is proving bad intent instead of mere idiocy, so you get higher damages. Code enforcement was involved, so I request those records. The landlord left a voicemail to the enforcement department saying to hold off on the fines. They will make the repairs as soon as the tenant is forced out. That was an easy case. Some crap like this happened to my dad. Landlord refused to make repairs, washer was busted, garbage disposal was leaking and forced floorboards to warp. My dad moved and wanted his deposit. They wouldn't give it to him. He took them to court. He took pictures before he left and kept all texts from them. They walked themselves into a corner with everything they said. My dad was prepared for every claim. Eventually the judge told my dad he could fight it until the end and get his whole deposit, or the landlord could give most of it now and it would be over. He took the deal because he didn't have the time for court, and the look of anger and defeat on the landlord's face was too satisfying. It's 3 years later and the repairs still haven't been made in the apartment. Edit. Spelling. Also he heard about the lack of repairs from his old neighbor who still lives there. I never understand these kinds of situations. The cost of repairs can't amount to more than a few $100s at first. The warped boards might push that up over $1K, but I'd be surprised if those repairs exceeded $2K. They easily spent more than that in court. Worked as paralegal investigator. Working a trade secrets case involving the manufacture of dental wheels used to grind teeth. Long story, but go with it. Company A was a small family-owned manufacturer but made the best product on the market from a small factory in the middle of nowhere. Sold massive amounts of product because of quality. Its location was remote enough and the owner paid employees so well, the employees stayed there forever. All of them had worked there for 30 plus years. When the founder of Company A died, it was sold to international Company B because the kids and grandkids had no interest in the company. Company B then closed the old factory and tried to use Company A's formula at their facilities. Company B couldn't make the formula work. Now enter Company C, another international company who lost the bid on buying Company A. When Company C heard about the problems Company B was having, they bought the old factory facilities and then rehired the old staff to restart production. All the employees of old Company A were delighted to have their good paying jobs back and went straight to work, producing the better quality items once again, and Company C's product worked. Company B sues Company C for trade secrets violation. When you buy a company, you buy their trade secrets. And this company had a bunch. This product was just one part, but the most profitable part of their operation. Thus, Company C, because of their action, was accused of violating the laws governing trade secrets. Company B even managed to get a temporary restraining order against Company C in federal court, and Company C had to stop manufacturing at the old plant now owned. This is when I enter the picture. Our firm represented Company C and I was assigned to interview all the employees. I was in the living room of this delightful older lady in her late 50s that offered me snacks, asked me if I was married and wanted to set me up with her granddaughter. You name it, best and funniest interview ever. Then she drops the bomb. I asked her how she knew how to make the product. All my previous interviews said so and so taught them, she said. From the directions on the wall. Total moment of silence. Directions on the wall? Yes, she said, no one ever looks at them. But there is a board on the wall with the directions. I called the janitor of the facility from her phone, yeah, this is before cell phones, and had him meet me there. He unlocks the place and yep, covered in probably 40 years of dust making it just part of the background, is a board with the entire process on it. Thus, when Company B sold the factory, which was eventually purchased by Company C, Company B accidentally sold the trade secret to Company C because they abandoned it on the wall. I did serious evidence sourcing on this. My best pictures were of the 65-plus-year-old former janitor knocking the dust off the pages, taking the entire board off the wall, putting it in paper bag, and sealing it so I never touched it. Every picture he smiled for the camera. His FU expression was priceless in every picture. They were so freaking funny. The judge in federal court was laughing his ass off when he heard the details of what I found to reverse the restraining order. When he opened the bag, he laughed even more. The factory reopened immediately. Company B and C settled by agreeing that they both got to use the trade secret but couldn't sell it to anyone else. What they really figured out was, those little old ladies had slightly changed the formula over the years and slightly made them better over time. Even the formula on the wall didn't work as well as these little ladies did. My brother is an attorney. He had a case where the guy said he was permanently disabled from a work accident. At a deposition, my brother overheard the guy talking about getting his house remodeled. He was already spending the money he thought he was getting. My brother drove by the house to see how much work was being done and saw the guy carrying bundles of roofing shingles up a ladder to the roof. This was before smartphones, so he drove to a Best Buy and bought a video camera, went back and recorded the guy. He had copies made and sent to the other attorney. The guy dropped the suit and was back at work the following Monday. My brother's client didn't want to pay for the video camera. He saved them thousands of dollars. They eventually paid, but he still gets a little peeved when he talks about it. Just out of curiosity, wouldn't the guy get charged for lying or whatever? There's no way he can go after a company for workers' comp or whatever and get caught in a lie then go straight back to work, right? Or would the company have to press charges? Not a lawyer but a legal videographer. This gentleman was claiming injuries seeking damages against his employer after a fall at work. He claimed he couldn't raise his right arm above his shoulder because of the fall. First deposition comes along and I am hired by defendant's attorney to videotape deposition of the plaintiff. Anyone know the first thing a court reporter asks you to do in a deposition? Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. Plaintiff raises his right arm above his shoulder with ease and no sign of discomfort. Does not occur to him what he has just done. Both attorneys were looking down at their notes when this happened and neither of them caught it. The plaintiff himself didn't catch it. The court reporter looked at him and then looked at me and her eyes went wide with realization at what just happened. 4 hours of deposition proceed wherein the plaintiff is instructed, multiple times, to show his range of motion and proceeds to pretend like he can't raise his arm above shoulder level, which he did at the very beginning of his deposition. Deposition ends. Plaintiff's counsel leaves. I call defense, hiring party, counsel over and show him the first 2 minutes of tape. Counsel excitedly whispers to me, "Case closed. You just saved us tens of thousands of dollars." I got a $5,000 bonus and plaintiff's case was dismissed with prejudice. I had client whose $60K car was ruined by a shop that put in the wrong oil. We couldn't prove it at first. The engine blew up, oil leaked out and evidence was lost. I subpoenaed their bank records, figured out they bought their oil from Costco. Called Costco and got their prices for the last 2 years. I then worked out the amounts they were spending, did some backhand math, and showed based on the values it was impossible they had ever bought the right oil. They settled in full immediately. Not as exciting in the moment as some other ones here, but we hired a private investigator to track our defendant in a fraud asset recovery case. Private investigator returned with a photograph of torn pieces of paper that clearly constituted a ripped up note, albeit in a foreign language. I happened to know said foreign language, so pieced it together and realized it was a letter written by the defendant raging at his accomplice for making highly specific mistakes that fucked him over in the context of our fraud asset recovery case. Obviously, We later had this verified and sworn to via affidavit by an official translator. It was unbelievable. The handwriting was a match. Plus, he'd also signed it, and the contents were so specific, contained information about specific amounts going into specific trusts under specific names, that it was basically a smoking gun. We almost thought they'd planted it to throw us off, but the guy was just stupid and arrogant. Ran into a bit of a fight readmissibility, but the letter ultimately helped us receive a significant settlement that made our clients extremely happy. This is so petty. I've had much bigger moments, but because of the character of the other side this will always be my favorite. Doing a boundary dispute, a squabble over what was essentially a few inches of land. OS was a lawyer, and an absolute asshole. He was acting for himself. The whole a lawyer who acts for himself as a fool for a client thing was bang on for him. But he was a deeply unpleasant guy, a bully who thought that he was the smartest guy in the room. Part of his case hinged on wheelie bins and how prior to the boundary having been moved there wasn't space to store a full-size bin beside the house. The fact you now could meant clearly the boundary must have moved. That was the extent of his evidence. It really was thin stuff. During the actual trial he pulled a fast one by suddenly producing an old aerial photo ostensibly to show the boundary at the front of the property had also moved. A fast one because you have to disclose stuff like that in advance. You can't just sit on something relevant and then suddenly whip it out at trial with a flourish. Whilst he was making his submissions that it should be admissible, I looked more closely at it, away from the bit of the boundary he said it was relevant to, and realized that it very clearly showed a wheelie bin in exactly the spot his case said there couldn't be one. Told the judge we were happy for the photo be admitted after all, got the other side to confirm the data was taken, then pointed out he'd just completely fucked his case. That photo did him for nearly 50k in adverse costs. Couldn't happen to a more deserving chapter. In a protective order hearing, a respondent admitted on cross that he choked his partner. His attorney looked like his head was going to explode. The judge still only granted an order not to abuse. He wouldn't grant the stay away or any other relief we asked for. Go figure. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.